Okay, here's our first podcast for Standard 2.4. In this podcast, we are going to be looking at photosynthesis and cellular respiration within the entire Standard 2.4. This will be broken down in several podcasts. But what we're going to be looking at is basically how cells get their energy, either through photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And then we're going to take a look at how those two reactions are very closely related to each other. So you will be able to explain the function of photosynthesis and identify the chemical reaction for photosynthesis, all the reactants and products that are involved. Then we will also be looking at the function of cellular respiration and its chemical reaction, and then we'll describe the relationship between those two. Again, this will be over several different podcasts. Lots of vocabulary within here that we'll be taking a look at. In this particular podcast, we're going to concentrate on the chloroplast and the parts of the chloroplast, and then we'll get into the different kinds of reactions that happen during photosynthesis. So when we talk about photosynthesis, let's talk about what it is. If you look at the word, you have photo, which means light, and synthesis means to make something. So when we're talking about photosynthesis, we're going to make something from light. And when the thing that we're going to be making is food. So autotrophs are able to make their own food by using the energy from the sun and converting it into chemical energy. So we're taking sun energy and we're converting it into chemical energy. That chemical energy is in the form of carbohydrates for the most part. So what we're looking at when we talk about photosynthesis is the formation of carbohydrates. And we're going to mainly talk about that in the sugar glucose. So photosynthesis, again, we're going to use light from the sun. Plants are going to combine water and carbon dioxide. And in that process, they're going to end up making sugar as their end product. That's what they want to get out of this. There's also a waste product that is produced as well. So if we take a look at the chemical formula or the general equation for photosynthesis, it would look like this. You have 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus 6 water molecules, plus this energy. Remember, that energy is coming from the sun. And that is going to give us our C6H12O6 and 6 oxygen molecules. C6H12O6, remember, is glucose. So your carbon dioxide plus water plus your sunlight is going to give you glucose and oxygen. And this is the reaction that happens every time photosynthesis occurs. We have the 6's in front of all of these different things so that we have a balanced equation. Remember, that's an important part of what we talk about in chemistry. And the whole purpose of photosynthesis is to make the glucose. And we also end up making oxygen. Oxygen actually is a waste product of photosynthesis in this case. Even though we don't think of oxygen as a waste, for this particular chemical process, it is a waste product. Not something that is required or is not the purpose of photosynthesis. It's not the reason that it happens. The reason it happens is to take this energy that's in the sun and store that energy in the bonds that make up a glucose molecule. Okay, so here's a simple diagram showing this. So here we have our sun energy coming into the plant. Carbon dioxide goes in, as does water, and then you can see the things coming out. You have your oxygen that goes out, gets released into the atmosphere, and you also get glucose being formed. That glucose that is formed mostly gets stored in fruits of different plants. So if you eat an apple, you're basically eating all of the stored food that was made by the apple tree in that apple. Now, all of this is going to happen, this process of photosynthesis happens in this organelle right here, and that organelle is called a chloroplast. Okay, so the organelle that you're going to have all over the place within a plant is the chloroplast. There's lots and lots of them, especially in the leaves, and they're what give the plant its green color. And this is where the actual process of photosynthesis is going to occur. So the chloroplast has specially designed pigments in there that's going to allow it to absorb the energy from the sunlight. So that light energy is going to go in and get absorbed into the chloroplast. And remember, we just showed the plant is also going to be taking in carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide comes in through little holes in the leaves. The water comes up through the roots. They go into the chloroplast and combine with this light energy, and through a very complicated set of reactions that we'll go over later, we end up getting our sugars, mainly in the form of glucose, and oxygen, which would be our waste product. So this is a very simplified version of what happens in photosynthesis. Again, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the actual chemical reactions, but the first thing we're going to do is take a closer look at the structure of the chloroplast. Okay, so remember the chloroplast is a membrane-bound organelle, and it's found mainly in plants and algae because those are the ones that are going to be doing photosynthesis. Okay, so the job of the chloroplast is to perform the chemical reaction of photosynthesis, where we're going to make our glucose. And where you find most of your chloroplasts are in the parts of the plants that are the most exposed to the sun. So you'll find them a lot in the leaves, and you'll find them in the stems within a plant, because that's where most of the photosynthesis happens, because that's where most of the sunlight is going to hit them. You don't have chloroplast in root cells because the sun doesn't ever get to the roots because they're underground. Okay, so if we were to look at some plant cells under a microscope, this is what we would see. So you can see here is an outline of the cell wall of a single cell, and then all inside of there you see all these green circles. Those are all chloroplasts. So there's a lot of them within a single plant cell. There can be hundreds of them in a single plant cell in a leaf. And that's because lots and lots of photosynthesis is going on during the daytime hours for a plant. So let's take a closer look at the parts of a chloroplast. So there is an outer double membrane that surrounds the chloroplast, so it's kind of like a double-bagged organelle. And then inside of there you also have another membrane called a thylakoid membrane that fill up the inside of the chloroplast. These are membranes inside, and these are the ones that contain the pigment chlorophyll. So these are the ones that are going to be green in color because they have the chlorophyll. So again, you have a double membrane around it, and then inside you have more membranes called thylakoid membranes, and they are the ones that are filled with chlorophyll. Within these thylakoid membranes, we actually have the chlorophyll broken down into things called photosystems, and these are pigments and proteins grouped together in certain ways so that they are able to collect the maximum amount of energy from the sunlight. So those photosystems are what are going to actually be grabbing all of the energy from the sun and transferring it into chemical energy. Okay. It is in the thylakoid membranes where the light-dependent reactions take place. So when we get into the different reactions of photosynthesis, you'll see that there's light-dependent and light-independent. The light-dependent reactions are the ones that require light to occur, and they happen in the thylakoid membranes, which makes sense because the thylakoid membranes have the chlorophyll. Now, your thylakoids are actually stacked on top of each other, again, kind of like pancakes, and those stacks are called grana. A single grana is called a granum. So instead of A at the end, you'd put a UM. That would be one stack of thylakoids would be a granum. Okay, there are many grana inside of a single chloroplast. Lots and lots of stacks of thylakoids, so there's lots and lots of places where the energy from the sun can get trapped and transferred over to chemical energy. Okay, so here is a picture of a chloroplast. So again, here we have our outer membrane and our inner membrane, so that's that double membrane. And then inside here, one of these little disc-looking things is a thylakoid. And here we have a full stack of thylakoids all on top of each other. And you can see there's a bunch of these grana all surrounding it in here, lots of stacks of them. They're actually connected to each other by something called lamellae. And then all these empty space within there is the stroma, and other important reactions are going to happen in the stroma. Okay, so continuing with this, before we get to the stroma, we're going to talk about chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is the pigment that absorbs all light except for green, which is why it looks green. And the main job of chlorophyll is to collect energy from the sun, and that energy is then going to be used to make sugar. So again, we're getting our energy from the sun, but we can't just use that energy the way it is. We have to convert it and change it into chemical energy, and we put that chemical energy into our sugars. The stroma is the liquid area that is outside of the grana. And this is where a set of reactions called the light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle, are going to occur. So this means that they do not require light to happen. It doesn't mean that they have to happen in the dark. It just means that they happen after the light reactions happen. So after we get the energy from the sunlight, then the second part of the whole process happens, which is the light-independent reactions, the Calvin cycle. Okay, so here's another picture of our chloroplasts. Again, you have your double membrane and you have your stacks of thylakoids in here. These are the lamellae that will connect all of them together. So as this one absorbs sunlight, it can send more information over here and then kind of like sending that energy around. And then all of this space, all within here is the stroma, and that is the whole area where all of the light independent reactions are going to occur.